Have you ever been in a conversation where your faith was questioned? Not with curiosity, but with hostility. Maybe it was a coworker who laughed at your beliefs, or a family member who scoffed. You don't actually believe all that Bible stuff, do you? And in that moment, your heart races. Your mind searches for the right words. But deep down, a question lingers. What's the real goal here? Is it just to prove them wrong? To win the argument? Or is there something greater at stake? C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest Christian thinkers of all time, once faced this very challenge. He wasn't always a believer. In fact, for years, he was an atheist, convinced that Christianity was nothing more than a fairy tale. But something changed, and it wasn't because someone defeated him in debate. It was because someone planted a thought, a simple, undeniable truth that wouldn't leave him alone. What if that is our true goal? Not just to argue, but to plant a seed, to make them think in a way they never have before. This changes everything, because now it's not about destroying their arguments, it's about building a bridge. So, how do we do that? Before we dive into this eye-opening truth, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stand boldly in your faith by commenting, "I will stand firm in Christ." This small action might seem simple, but it sends a powerful ripple into the world, spreading light where darkness tries to creep in. And trust me, if you truly want to make an impact, stay with me till the end, because the last point will shift the way you see every conversation about your faith. Well, let's start with this. How did Jesus handle his critics? When the Pharisees came after Jesus, trying to trap him with their words, he didn't lash out. He didn't get defensive. Instead, he often answered with a question, like the time they tried to corner him about paying taxes. They expected a yes or no answer. Instead, Jesus held up a coin and asked, "Whose image is on this?" Luke 20:24. In that moment, he wasn't just giving them a response, he was making them think. And that is the key. When someone attacks your faith, your first instinct might be to fire back with facts, with evidence, with everything you know. And yes, there's a time for that. But if the goal is to open their heart, sometimes the most powerful response is a question that makes them pause. For example, imagine someone says, "The Bible is full of contradictions." Instead of arguing, try this. "That's interesting. Have you actually read it for yourself or just heard that from others?" Or when someone says, "I could never believe in a God who allows suffering," instead of a long-winded explanation, ask, "If you could remove suffering but lose free will, would that be worth it?" See what's happening? Instead of just defending, you're making them wrestle with the truth. And that's exactly what happened to C.S. Lewis. There was a moment, a single moment, where his whole perspective began to crack. It wasn't during a fiery debate. It wasn't because someone humiliated him with logic. It was a thought. If my mind is simply a product of blind evolution, just atoms bouncing around, then why should I trust my own reasoning at all? This question, so simple, yet so profound, was one of the first steps that led him from atheism to belief. What if the same could happen for someone you know? Now imagine this. Instead of seeing non-believers as opponents in a debate, you see them as people who, whether they realize it or not, are searching. Because deep down, everyone is searching for truth. And that's where you come in. So let me ask you, are you planting seeds or just trying to win fights? Drop a comment below and say, "Planting seeds matters," if this hit home for you. And let's be real, have you ever been in a tough conversation about faith? How did it go? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. But here's the thing, planting a seed isn't enough because seeds need nourishment to grow. And that means we have to understand how to speak to non-believers in a way that reaches their heart, not just their head. So, how do we do that? How do we speak in a way that reaches the heart, not just the head? Because let's be honest, logic alone doesn't save people. If it did, every skeptic who ever read a book on Christian apologetics would be a believer by now. But we know that's not the case. Something deeper has to happen. And this is where C.S. Lewis gives us a brilliant example. Think about the Screwtape Letters. Instead of writing a heavy theological argument against the devil's schemes, Lewis took a totally different approach. He wrote from the perspective of a demon, giving advice on how to destroy a person's faith. Why? Because when you let people see deception from the inside, they begin to recognize it in their own lives. And that is the power of storytelling. Jesus did the same thing with his parables. He didn't just lecture people on truth. He wrapped truth in stories, because stories don't just tell, they show. They reach a place that logic alone can't touch. Think about this. If you tell someone money can't buy happiness, they might nod, but will they really believe you? Probably not. But what if you tell them a story? A story of a man who had everything: wealth, status, success. But at night, he stared at the ceiling, feeling empty inside. And one day, he met a poor widow who had nothing, yet she radiated joy. And when he asked why, she simply said, "Because I have everything I need in Christ." Now that makes a person feel the truth. And feeling the truth, that's when it sticks. So, when you talk to non-believers, don't just throw Bible verses at them like darts. Instead, tell a story. Maybe it's your story. Because let's be real, every Christian has a testimony. Maybe yours isn't dramatic. Maybe you didn't have a wild past. But your story of how Christ changed your heart, that's powerful. In fact, let me ask you, what's your story? How has Jesus changed your life? Drop a comment below with "Jesus changed me." And if you're feeling bold, share your testimony. You never know who it might encourage. But even when we share stories, there's still one big challenge. What if they just don't listen? What if they roll their eyes? What if they cut you off saying, "I'll never believe this stuff"? That's when you have to remember, your job isn't to force faith on anyone. Your job is to plant the seed and let God do the growing. Jesus himself told us this in the parable of the sower, Matthew 13:3-9. Some seeds will fall on rocky ground. Some will get choked out, but some will land on good soil and grow. Your words might not change someone today, but maybe 5 years from now, when they're alone, struggling and searching, that seed you planted will start to sprout. Because truth has a way of sticking, even when people pretend it doesn't. And C.S. Lewis, he knew this firsthand. For years, he resisted Christianity. He didn't want it to be true. He fought against it. But those little thoughts, the ones planted by others, the ones buried deep in his mind, they wouldn't leave him alone. Until one day, as he later wrote, he gave in, not in some emotional moment, not because he wanted to, but because he had to, because the truth was simply undeniable. And that's how it happens for so many people. They may resist, they may argue, but the truth, when planted right, has a way of growing in the heart. So, don't be discouraged. If someone rejects what you say, if they mock you, if they seem totally uninterested, don't lose heart, because you have no idea what God might be doing beneath the surface. And that leads us to the final, most important question. If planting seeds is our job, then how do we do it well? Because let's be honest, not every seed we plant will grow. Some will be ignored. Some will be dismissed. Some will even be attacked. So how do we plant seeds in a way that actually gives them a chance to take root? C.S. Lewis gives us an answer, not just through his words, but through his approach. He never argued just to win. He never debated just to prove a point. He spoke in a way that made people think. Look at mere Christianity. Lewis didn't start with, "The Bible is true, and here's why." He started with something universal, something every human, regardless of belief, experiences, the moral law. He asked, why do we all have a sense of right and wrong? Where does that come from? And by the time the reader started questioning their own assumptions, that's when he introduced God. That's brilliant, because people don't reject Christianity because they've logically disproven it. They reject it because they think it doesn't matter to them. So the key is to make them see this matters more than you realize. So how do we do this in everyday conversations? Here's a simple shift that changes everything. Instead of pushing truth at people, draw it out of them. For example, if someone says, "I don't believe in God," don't just say, "Well, here's proof that he exists." Instead, ask, if God were real, would you even want him to be? That question reveals something deeper, because for many, it's not a matter of evidence, it's a matter of desire. Or if someone says, "I think all religions are basically the same," don't just list the differences. Ask, if that's true, why did Jesus say, "I am the way, the truth, and the life"? John 14:6. Let them wrestle with the answer. Let them think about it long after the conversation ends. Because when a person discovers truth for themselves, it sticks far more than when it's just handed to them. And this is so important, because we're not just talking about arguments here. We're talking about souls, about eternity. The people who challenge your faith, they're not just skeptics. They're not just critics. They are souls that Jesus died for. And if we treat them like enemies, we're missing the whole point. Look at how Jesus treated doubters. He didn't destroy Thomas for questioning the resurrection. He showed him the scars. John 20:27. He didn't humiliate the woman at the well for her sinful past. He revealed the truth to her and changed her life. John 4:7-26. He didn't argue with Nicodemus about theology. He told him, "You must be born again." John 3:3. Jesus wasn't about winning debates. He was about winning hearts. And that is what we're called to do. So let me ask you, when non-believers attack your faith, how do you respond? Are you just trying to win? Or are you trying to reach them? Because at the end of the day, people may forget your arguments. They may forget the Bible verses you quoted, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So, if you really want to lead people to Christ, love them like he did. That's the challenge. That's the mission. And if you're ready to take it seriously, drop a comment below with, "I will plant seeds," because every seed matters. Every conversation matters. Every soul matters. And who knows? Maybe that conversation that feels pointless today is the one God will use to change a life forever. This next video is handpicked just for you. YouTube knows you'll love it. Or dive into this C.S. Lewis playlist for even deeper wisdom. And hey, don't leave without subscribing. Your journey has just begun.